As the Middle Ages was coming to an end, and humanism began to flourish, the mind was very much alive, and many great works came out of this period, one of which being Thomas More's Utopia, and that is what we will focus on today. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. The work that immediately comes to mind upon reading Thomas More's Utopia is Plato's Republic. Though this work did not influence political thought nearly to the same degree that Plato's did, we can still learn a significant amount from it. What makes it feel similar to Plato's Republic is the fact that it consists of a dialogue between characters that sketch out different ideologies, and the latter half of the book more fully paints the picture of the main character's ideal society. Here, though, our protagonist is a philosopher named Raphael and not Socrates. Thomas More does feature in this book, but his own views are not well represented in the character that shares his name. The two other characters are Peter Giles and Cardinal John Morton. The book begins with More working as an ambassador to King Henry VIII, who he lavishes with praise while traveling. He sees his friend Peter Giles, and the two of them go enjoy dinner with a local philosopher named Raphael. Raphael enthralls the two men with his stories of travels with Amerigo Vespucci, during which he landed on the island of Utopia, which he will later go on to describe in great detail. The men are so impressed with Raphael that they think he should be an advisor to the king, but he disagrees. He believes that he couldn't have any real effect in the common man's life as an advisor to the king, because kings thirst for power, not peace, and they often surround themselves with yes-men. Plus, Raphael doesn't want any wealth or power. He uses an example of a conversation that he had with an advisor to a king named Cardinal Morton to further his point. The cardinal was lamenting the current state of things, where no matter what precautions were taken, there was still constant thievery in the kingdom. Raphael argues that several factors create thievery, such as the way that standing armies need to flex their muscles in times of peace in order to stay sharp for war, so soldiers become cunning thieves. On top of that, noblemen bleed the life out of the peasants by buying up all the land and sheep, while raising prices on rents and necessities like bread and wool. These noblemen are often surrounded by useless retainers who know nothing about actual crafts and serve no real purpose. These people are the actual thieves, not those who steal a loaf of bread to keep their families alive. Because of this, Raphael believes that capital punishment is too harsh and that, quote, it would be much better to make some provisions for their livelihood, so that no one should labor under the cruel necessity first of stealing and then of dying for it, end quote. He expands on this by pointing out that we basically create a culture which necessitates thievery for survival and then punish them for it. Worse than that, we actually encourage thieves to murder, because if thievery and murder are punished the same, then why doesn't that thief just kill the witness to his thievery? And worst of all, God commanded us not to kill, yet the law of man encourages us to go against God's law. Raphael does not think that thievery should be totally unpunished, but the death penalty is only the very last resort. The cardinal is hesitant at first, but does eventually change over to Raphael's side, which convinces the other people at the table. These people were just saying what the cardinal wanted to hear, and could be convinced of anything. Raphael then makes the point even further to More and Giles by giving an example where a French king wants to expand his territory, and Raphael suggests that he should not expand but simply govern his territory better, and the men agree that this would be laughed off in the king's court. Also, the idea that the king would rule solely in his people's interest and not be thinking of himself is also laughable. To them, Raphael's idea of a king that is not at all slothful or prideful, and that tends to his people like a good shepherd which would sacrifice his life for his sheep, just isn't particularly realistic. More suggests that Raphael shouldn't use abstract moral principles, but instead should have a more practical philosophy that can be molded with changing situations. But again, Raphael disagrees by saying that More's suggestion is the same as having no moral compass that guides us to true north, and we as Christians surely cannot accept that. He then harkens back to Plato, saying that the ideal kingdom shall have no private property, and everything should be owned in public. More quickly disagrees, saying that there would be no incentive to work if no one in particular prospers from it. Raphael's rebuttal takes place in Book 2, where we get a better understanding of the island of Utopia. He says that he has seen this lack of private property in action. The island of Utopia was made up of 54 identical cities that all have the same values, law, customs, and language. All of the cities were perfectly happy with their boundaries and didn't try to encroach on others. Just outside of each city was an equal size of farmland which the citizens took turns farming. There, they lived in houses of at least 40 people and 2 slaves. These slaves were taken through war or by punishment of serious crimes, but never through purchase. The citizens worked for 2 years and then returned to the city. This worked in a fashion where 20 would swap out each year so that the remaining 20 could teach the new 20. 30 houses together were ruled by a phylarch, which in total would be 200 in number. The highest ranking ruler was the proto-phylarch, who was elected by a system where the people chose 4 potential rulers, and then the phylarchs chose the final winner. Every house in Utopia had a large garden in the back, which provided a bit of competition for the citizens because they wanted to have the most beautiful garden in their neighborhood. Every citizen had to learn to farm, and on top of this, they received a general education in philosophy, astronomy, logic, arithmetic, music, and more. Each citizen was given a specialization whereby they could produce for the community. Especially intelligent citizens received a special education to become a type of philosopher. Workdays were only 6 hours long, with 3 of those taking place in the morning, then a 2-hour break, and then 3 hours again in the afternoon. Leisure time could be spent however one wished, but those who chose to spend their free time working on their craft were praised. Their clothing was relatively boring and modest, but was sufficient to keep them cool in the summer and warm in the winter. Premarital sex was prohibited, and so was adultery. Men were expected to get married at 22 and women at 18. The women then moved into the man's house with his parents and grandparents, where they would take care of his family as they aged. They have several religions in Utopia, one of which is Christianity. To Utopians, God is the foundation of virtue, and we all will be judged in the afterlife. Hedonism is never tolerated, and the highest joys come from health of the body, mind, and spirit. All of these religions are close enough in belief that there isn't any warring between them. Rarely do Utopians make war, in fact, and when they do, it is as a last resort. When war does come, though, they stick to intelligence more than strength. They often use mercenaries to fight in their stead, and they set bounties on the heads of the high-ranking officials. The book ends by the 3 splitting up and Mora concluding that many things about Utopia are absurd, particularly the lack of private property, but perhaps some elements of Utopia could make their way to Europe. So what do you think? Is Utopia possible?